My sister looked at my son the way a drowning person looks at a life preserver, and I told myself it was grief. I was wrong. She lost her boy 3 years before my son was born. He was 4 years old, healthy, loud, obsessed with anything that had wheels, and then a fever became bacterial meningitis, and he was gone in 72 hours. Her marriage ended within a year. The woman who survived that loss was quieter, hollowed out, like someone had removed something load-bearing from inside her, and she'd been compensating ever since. So when my wife and I brought our son home, I gave my sister every possible excuse. Of course she'd be emotional. Of course she'd want to hold him constantly. Of course she'd tear up at the sight of him. I handed out understanding like it had no limit. The first sign I couldn't rationalize away came from the nursery. I was walking past the cracked door when I heard her voice, low and deliberate. "I've been waiting for you. You came back to me." When I stepped in, she smiled and said he'd just fallen asleep mid-sentence. I told myself I'd misheard the context. I hadn't. The language shifted over months. She stopped using his name and started calling him my boy, not the way an aunt would, casual and affectionate, something possessive, something private. She corrected my wife's parenting choices in front of us. "He doesn't like that texture. I know what he likes." She floated a nickname for him, the same one her son had gone by. When my wife gently declined, my sister's face went somewhere frightening before she recovered it. She started appearing at our house without calling, not often enough to be undeniable, but enough that my wife began keeping a mental record. At some point, she set up what she called a little space at her apartment, a toddler bed, a shelf of picture books, a bin of carefully chosen toys. She brought it up once like it was charming, then mentioned it again weeks later with a different edge. He still hasn't actually stayed over. We discovered later she'd been taking small things from our home, a sippy cup, a stuffed rabbit he'd outgrown, one of his sleep blankets. She said she wanted him to feel comfortable when he visited. She was preparing for visits we had never approved. The conversation happened on a Saturday. We sat with her and explained as carefully as we could that her grief was real, and we honored it, but our son wasn't built to carry it, that she needed professional support. She sat with her hands folded, very still, listening, and then she stood up and said, "You're doing this because somewhere you already know. He was meant for me. God doesn't take a child without giving one back." We got her into therapy. We genuinely believed we'd broken through. 3 weeks later, my son's daycare called. My sister had shown up at afternoon pickup. She had his emergency contact form memorized. We later realized she'd photographed it off our counter. She told the staff there was a family emergency. They released him. I drove to her apartment in 17 minutes. The door was unlocked. They were at the kitchen table working on a puzzle together, my son completely unbothered, my sister wearing an expression so serene it made the hair on my arm stand up. She looked at me and said, "See, we're fine here. This is what it's supposed to look like." I took my son and left. She didn't stop me. She stood in the doorway watching us walk to the car with a devastation on her face that I recognized. It was the same look she had at her son's funeral, like she was losing him a second time. We filed a police report. She was charged. We changed his daycare, enrolled him in a different school, and moved 40 minutes away. A restraining order followed. I still mourn the sister I grew up with. The grief she carries is real, and I'm not sure anyone could survive what she survived with themselves fully intact. But grief had become something in her that didn't care what it consumed, trying to feel whole again. My son is 6 now. He doesn't remember any of it. I remember all of it.